Hey guys, welcome back. So this video is about how I approach the MBA interviews at Wharton, Booth, and MIT, and how I was able to convert all 3 interviews into offers. My mentality for the interview stage was to fit in. This is in contrast to my mentality in the earlier stages of the application process, where I really wanted to stand out. The reason why this mentality change is so important is that you're trying to convince the decision maker, whether it's the admissions committee, whether it's the students, or the alumni, that you're someone that they can see in the class. You're a unique, cool person, just like all the current students. I've broken this video down into 3 parts. The first part is what I call content prep. This is all the background work. So here is where I will share with you all the questions that I used to prep for my interviews, how I structured my responses, and I'll even give you an example of one of my responses. The second part is what I call practice. Sounds simple, but here I will share with you the systematic process that I used to practice and rehearse for my interviews. Finally, the third part. This is where I'll talk about the different types of interviews. And I'll even spend a bit of time talking about Wharton's unique team-based interviews. And I'll cap it off by sharing some of my tips and tricks to perform well on the day of your interview. But stay tuned till the end because I have some bonus content. My friend Nicole and we're gonna be unboxing this sweet swag pack we just received from Wharton. But before we get started, please like, comment, and subscribe below. Content prep. So the first thing I did for you guys is I've included a Word document in the description below of all the questions I use to prep for my interviews. In addition to that, I actually highlighted in color the different questions each of Wharton, Booth, and MIT asked me during my actual interview. I collected all of these questions through ClearAdmit, Poets and Quants, as well as GMAT Club. Now it's likely that these questions don't change from year to year, but I encourage you to go to these websites and find the most up-to-date questions. So once you're done researching these questions, what you'll realize is that there's hundreds of different questions and there's new ones popping up each year. So what I did next is create what I call a situation bank. So this is a bank of like 5 or 6 different situations that I can draw stories from to answer questions no matter how it's worded. So an example of a situation that I had in my bank was working on a pharmaceutical patent infringement case where we managed to double the other side's settlement offer. So what you'll notice is that this situation is a little broad, bordering vague, and that's actually the key. Because here, no matter if they're asking me about an adversity question or a strengths question, I have this wrapper, this context to apply and answer that question. So I can pull an example such as a very difficult analysis that I had to conduct in that case, or I can talk about the high-functioning team that I worked on. Once I finished collecting my situation bank, I spent my time trying to figure out how to structure my answers. And the most common framework I found online was the STAR framework. So this stands for situation, task, action, and result. But I actually found that this framework wasn't the best for all of my responses. It came off as rigid and rehearsed when I used the same format for all of my responses. So in addition to the STAR framework, I started incorporating other frameworks. So coming from consulting, a secondary framework that I included was the problem, result, and explanation framework. So here I give context and describe the problem, and then immediately share my result. That followed by an explanation of how I went from the problem to the ultimate result. The advantage of this framework is that you tell them what the starting point is, what the ending point is, and then you fill in the gap. So it's not a mystery novel to the interviewer. Finally, I found that there were some questions where neither of these 2 frameworks fit, so I really needed to use an ad hoc approach. So an example is during my MIT interview, I was asked, what are some of your other hobbies beyond skiing and cooking? So here, there's no problem. I might have a result or an accomplishment, but the whole point of this question is to share some of my hobbies. So this was my response. So as you know from my 1-minute video, I'm a tech nerd and I love working with my hands and building something. So most recently, I bought an electric scooter and I started trying to modify the software so that it allows me to go faster than the manufacturer standards. What's interesting is I was actually talking to a Sloanie and she mentioned that during the cold winters here, she tried to hide away by going into the underground tunnels and she discovered a blacksmith. So something that I would love to do while I'm here at Sloan is to sign up for a class at the blacksmith. Ultimately, I hope to make a Damascus knife, which is this knife that has like multiple layers of metal and it looks really cool. And I think it'll actually blend really well with my cooking hobby where I get to actually use a tool that I made with my own hands. So in this situation, there really wasn't a problem and there certainly was not a result. So this is why it really calls for this ad hoc approach to be able to read the question and be flexible with your answers to not come off as rigid and rehearsed. So the last piece of the content prep stage is to get a list of 5 or 6 questions that you would ask your interviewer. And these questions differ based on whether you're asking an admissions committee member, a student, or an alumni. An example of a question that I love asking students is to challenge them and ask them, if there's something that you can change about your school, what would it be? Now, the second stage of the interview prep process, practice. It sounds simple enough, but I went about it very systematically. As most of you may know, it's very different to rehearse what you're going to say in your mind versus actually saying it out loud. So the first step is to actually say your responses out loud. You'll realize that there are some words and some phrases that just don't roll off your tongue very naturally. The second step that I took was look into a mirror and repeat those responses. It's a completely different feeling to say those responses out loud while staring at a blank wall versus staring at an actual live human being. The third step is to find a friend, find a family member, and rehearse your responses out to them. What you'll notice is that many of them will have different reactions even if you give the same response to them. So here, I learned how to adjust my speed, my tone, as well as the details of my actual content based on the reactions of my audience. So if they looked confused, I'd slow down and potentially go higher level and not go too deep into the details. Now, this is all well and good if you're interviewing in person, but I know this year it can be a bit different. Some of you are going to be interviewing virtually. So as a fourth step, what I recommend you do is practice looking into a webcam. When I first started recording YouTube videos, it was weird staring in this tiny little lens. It's very different than staring at a wall and even a person. So that's why I recommend you actually practice staring at your webcam and giving a full response. And I assure you, it's gonna be weird the first time you try it, but as you get more comfortable, it becomes more natural. The third and final stage that I'll talk about is interview day. And the first thing I want to talk about is admissions committee member-led interviews versus student-led interviews versus alumni-led interviews. Now, I don't have much experience with the alumni-led interviews, so I'll just share my experiences about the first two. For admissions committee member-led interviews, your questions are going to be a lot more tailored. Back to my example from MIT, they asked me what are some of my hobbies beyond skiing and cooking. So they obviously had an in-depth understanding of my profile, and they had very targeted questions for me. This is in contrast to student-led interviews, where the questions are going to be a lot more generic. So an equivalent of the MIT question would be, what are some of your hobbies? But the most unique interview is the Wharton team-based discussion, or TBD as we call it. So weeks ahead of your Wharton TBD, you'll receive a prompt. The prompt that I got last year for my interview was to design a launch event for the new Tangent Hall building. And they had a list of 5 to 6 different bullets that we had to hit on in our solution, such as what are the events that we wanted to run and how are we going to collect feedback. As part of prep for my TBD, I actually created a template for me to record the different ideas that the other candidates had. And I've included that template in the description below. During the day of the interview, we were matched into random groups of 5 or 6 candidates and brought into a room to discuss our solutions. So there were really 3 stages. We started off by each giving a 1-minute presentation of our solution, followed by a discussion, and ultimately we had to make a group presentations to the admissions fellows on our proposed solution. During the TBD, I actually wanted to go first or second and just give my pitch so that I can free up my headspace and focus on the responses of the other candidates. During the discussion, I really leaned on my improv background, and there's a principle called yes and. So an example of this is one of the other candidates suggested we use an app so that attendees could navigate the different events. My response to that was, I totally agree, Amy. That's a great idea that I think will make navigating the event a lot easier for the attendees. We can just push a feedback collection form at the end of each event, and naturally that will help us aggregate the data rather than having a separate response form for the attendees to fill out afterwards, which might not even get that much reception. So here I was able to agree with other candidates' idea, but also build on top of it and push the discussion forward. Finally, I'll cap this off with just some rapid fire tips and tricks that you can use during interview day. So the first is to arrive at your interview site 2 to 3 hours before your actual interview. This might sound absurd, but trust me, spend that time to walk around the area and you might actually find something interesting that you can talk about during your interview. And this can make the adcoms feel like you're already part of the community. Second, remember to use the bathroom before your interview. You certainly don't want to sit through a 30-minute to 1 hour interview on a full bladder. Third, I've mentioned this during the practice section of this video, but I want to reiterate it again. Pay attention to your interviewer's body language and facial expression, and adjust your responses based off of that. Sometimes it's not even about your response, it's how well you connect with your interviewer. Finally, be personable. Your interviewers are looking for a class of human beings, not robots. So show some emotion, show some enthusiasm, and show some excitement. To cap it off, make sure you send them a thank you email. A tactic that I like to use is to ask them for their business card or their email at the end of the interview as my final question so that I always know where to send that thank you email. Alright, the moment you've been waiting for, the Wharton swag pack. So as you can see, this box is very well decorated. It's got the Wharton logo, the class of 2022 logo, hashtag Wharton Proud. There was a shipping label here that I ripped off just because it's got my address on it. So let's open it up. Alright. Whoa, alright, look. It's got a hat. So I'm in cluster 1. Oh, so it's like kind of open, adjust to your own size. It's from Nike. Very fashionable. The next thing is, oh cool, it's a Wharton t-shirt, and it's got 22 on the back for my graduation year, and then it's got a fancy name tag. A metallic magnetic name tag. Oh, and this is, I'm assuming, what we would use if we did go to class in person. So I guess this is the nameplate. I think it's plastic. I'm not too sure. Very cool. So it's on both sides. There you go. This is the swag pack. So like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.